On June 17th, 1994, the NBA Finals were interrupted as virtually every television station in the country decided that they would rather show live footage of a white Bronco driving slowly down the 91 freeway in Los Angeles. Inside the Bronco was Al Cowlings, a former professional football player, and his friend, O.J. Simpson, who was supposed to have turned himself in that morning because of an arrest warrant dealing with the murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown, and her friend, Ron Goldman. Some 95 million people watched the hour-long car chase that became a defining moment of the 1990s, and his acquittal in the trial of the century that followed is still controversial today. But believe it or not, the infamous Bronco chase is not the only important event in history to have occurred on June 17th. There were many other important events that occurred prior to the Bronco chase, including one involving the world's most famous vampire on this day in history. On December 15th, 1577, Francis Drake left England on an exploring expedition that was also a covert raiding voyage meant to challenge Spain and Portugal's global domination. On June 17th, 1579, Drake and his men landed near the modern San Francisco Bay, where he claimed California for England as Nova Albion, Albion being an ancient name for Britain. While camped there, the local Miwok people placed chains around Drake's neck, a scepter in his hand, and a crown of feathers on his head. The gesture was part of the basis for England's claims on the west coast of North America. In military history, on June 17, 1642, Vlad the Impaler led 30,000 men in a night attack on the camp of Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. Mehmed had invaded Vlad's land in Wallachia, modern-day Romania, to punish Vlad for failing to pay the Ottomans tribute. Vlad's attack failed, but he killed around 10,000 to 15,000 Ottomans for a loss of just 5,000. And when Mehmed sought to besiege the Wallachian capital afterwards, he found the roads lined with 20,000 impaled Turks. Within a few weeks, Mehmed withdrew to Adrianople. In 1665, the Portuguese Restoration War was near its end after 25 years. The Spanish, under the Marquis de Caracena, hoped to end the Portuguese insurrection in a single decisive action, but was forced to move quickly because of King Philip VI's declining health. On June 17th, roughly equal forces of around 22,000 met at Montes Claros. The Spanish made a series of charges, the last of which was torn apart by Portuguese artillery. 1,200 Spanish cavalry alone were killed in the third charge. Portuguese countercharge routed the remaining Spanish, effectively securing Portuguese independence. After the battles of Lexington and Concord, 15,000 American militia gathered to besiege the British in Boston. Around 6,000 British under the command of General Thomas Gage were besieged there. Gage sought to extend his defenses to the Charlestown Peninsula just north of the town, but the Americans got word of the plan on June 13th. On the night of June 16th, they hastily occupied two hilltops there, Bunker and Breed's Hills. On June 17th, the British decided to attack, believing the untrained rabble would be easily defeated. The British launched 3 bloody attacks on Breed's Hill before they carried the hill. The British lost more soldiers at Breed's Hill than in any other single encounter in the war. During the Great Sioux War of 1876, General George Crook advanced from the Tongue River near modern Sheridan, Wyoming, with around 950 soldiers and 250 Crow and Shoshone allies, to force Crazy Horse, along with Lakota and Cheyenne warriors, onto a reservation. On June 17th, the Lakota Cheyenne forces attacked Crook's men at Rosebud Creek. The battle lasted for 7 hours, unusually long for battles with native tribes of the period. Crook barely averted complete disaster thanks to the Crow and Shoshone scouts, and between 13 and 36 Lakota and Cheyenne and 14 and 28 American soldiers were killed. Crook declared victory but quickly withdrew, and thus played no part in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Custer's last stand, only 8 days later. In 1925, the League of Nations acted to bar the use of chemical weapons in war after poisonous gases had been used to terrible effect during World War I. At the Geneva Conference for the Supervision of the International Traffic in Arms, members of the League signed the Geneva Protocol on June 17th, which prohibits asphyxiation, poisonous or other gases, and of all analogous liquids, materials, or devices, and bacteriological methods of warfare. During World War II, numerous significant events took place on June 17th. In 1940, Field Marshal Philippe Pétain was made Prime Minister of France after Paul Renaud resigned, and the same day Pétain sent a message to Hitler to request peace negotiations. The same day saw the sinking of the British ocean liner RMS Lancastria, while it was evacuating British nationals and soldiers near the port of Saint-Nazaire. An uncertain number of people, between 4,000 and 7,000, died in the sinking, making it possibly the worst loss of life at sea in British history. Churchill ordered the news suppressed. In 1942, a Korean nationalist named Park Soo-won attempted to assassinate Japanese Premier Hideki Tojo, shooting him in the arm. Soo-won was killed by return fire. Iceland has an intimate connection with the date. Iceland was united with Norway in 1262, and on June 17, 1397, Norway joined Sweden and Denmark in the Kalmar Union. 547 years later, on June 17, 1944, Iceland declared itself independent from Denmark and established the Icelandic Republic. Well, Denmark was still under German occupation. On the same date in 2000, Iceland was struck by a 6.3 magnitude earthquake, the first major earthquake on the island since 1912. In 1995, after 6 months of battling Chechen separatists in Russia, a group of Chechen rebels attacked the town of Budyanovisk, 70 miles from the Chechen border. They took hundreds of hostages, possibly as many as 2,000, and holed up in the city's hospital. The Chechens demanded an end to the First Chechen War. On June 17th, Russian troops attempted to storm the hospital but failed to dislodge the Chechens, though hostages were caught in the crossfire and used as human shields. 2 more attacks would also fail, and eventually the Chechens were allowed to return to Chechnya. Official figures report 129 people killed, including 18 police and 17 soldiers, along with more than 400 wounded, although some estimates are higher. In New Zealand history, in 1843, Arthur Wakefield, a magistrate and representative of the New Zealand Company, gathered a group of settlers in an attempt to arrest 2 Maori chiefs in the Wairau Valley. Wakefield had a deed to the land, but the Maori said that the land had not been sold. On June 17th, Wakefield and around 50 men attempted to arrest the Maori chiefs, Te Ranghaeta and Te Raprahara. Wakefield ordered his men to advance, and Te Ranghaeta's wife was killed. The Maori attacked, capturing 12 men, including Wakefield, who they then killed. 22 Europeans and 4 Maori were killed. Governor Robert Fitzroy exonerated the Maori chiefs, claiming the settlers were in the wrong, although he chastised the Maori for killing their prisoners. During the Cold War, numerous important events took place on June 17th. It was on that date in 1967 that China conducted Test Number 6, the country's first test of a hydrogen bomb. The test made it the 4th country, after the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, to develop a thermonuclear weapon. On this day, in 1953, a small strike action began on June 16th in East Germany against work quotas, which suddenly ballooned into an uprising involving 1 million people all over the country. Forced collectivization, repression of religious activity, and taxation against private industry, along with declining living standards, contributed to the strike. On the morning of June 17th, around 25,000 protesters gathered at the House of Ministries, while thousands more gathered elsewhere. A number of protesters stormed the ministries, apparently overpowering the defenders there. The government seemed on the verge of being overthrown before the Soviet military drove off the protesters and secured the building. Demonstrations continued, and the Soviet troops fired into the crowds. As many as 40 German workers were executed and 10,000 arrested. Estimates of deaths in the protests range from 55 to 209. West Germany long remembered the uprising and celebrated it as a public holiday on June 17th until reunification. Important cultural history also took place on June 17th. In India, Shah Jahan became the emperor of the Mughal Empire in 1628, and his 30-year reign is known as the Golden Age of Mughal architecture. The most prominent example of the architecture came because of the death of Jahan's wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who died in childbirth on June 17th, 1631. Her death and memory inspired one of the world's great architectural buildings, the Taj Mahal, where she is entombed. Construction began in 1632. The mausoleum itself was completed in 1638 or 39, with surrounding buildings and decoration work continuing until at least 1647. On June 17, 1885, 200,000 people lined the docks of New York City as a French steamer approached. Aboard the steamer were more than 200 cases holding 350 individual pieces of a giant sculpture, the Statue of Liberty. The statue was conceived by French sculptor Frédéric Auguste Bertholdi, who was inspired by the work of Edouard de L'Hubillier at a dinner party celebrating the victory of the Union in the Civil War in 1865. Liberty, enlightening the world, was announced in 1875, and it took years to raise the money to build the statue. When it arrived, the U.S. hadn't yet raised enough money to build the pedestal, but Joseph Pulitzer successfully ran a funding drive in the New York World. The statue was finally assembled and unveiled on October 28, 1886. On June 17th, in 1928, a plane landed near Bury Point, South Wales, in the United Kingdom. Aboard it was a woman who soon became a world-renowned traveler and celebrity, Amelia Earhart. In April of 1928, she had received a call and an offer to fly across the Atlantic in a plane sponsored by Amy Guest. Her family was against the idea of her taking on the dangerous journey, so instead they found an American girl of the right type, which turned out to be Earhart. Earhart was already a pilot with 500 hours of experience, but the plane was flown by Wilmer Lower Stoltz, along with mechanic Louis Gordon. The three took off from Newfoundland on June 17th and arrived in South Wales 20 hours and 40 minutes later. This flight made Earhart famous. In sports history, Jack Nicklaus, called the Golden Bear, won his first professional golf tournament at 22 years old in 1962, beating out Arnold Palmer. It was the first of many. Nicklaus holds the record for the most major golf championships won, 3 more than Tiger Woods. On June 17, 1976, the American Basketball Association, started in 1967, officially merged with the National Basketball Association. 4 of the 6 remaining teams of the struggling ABA were absorbed into the NBA: the Denver Nuggets, Indiana Pacers, New York Nets, and San Antonio Spurs. In true crime history, June 17, 1972, was the day that 5 men broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, D.C. at the Watergate office building, an event which would eventually lead to President Richard Nixon's resignation. In 1933, FBI agents arrested Frank Jelly Nash, a prolific bank robber in Hot Springs, Arkansas. On the morning of June 17th, he arrived in Kansas City by train. 7 officers were present as he was transferred to a car, just before several of Nash's friends opened fire. 4 of the officers were killed, as was Nash. The FBI identified 3 men they believed carried out the attack: Charles Pretty Boy Floyd, Vernon Miller, and Adam Ricchetti, although the details remain disputed. Floyd was killed in a shootout with police, while Miller was found in a ditch, already dead. Ricchetti was convicted and executed in 1938. The Kansas City Massacre changed the FBI. Prior to the massacre, FBI agents were not officially allowed to carry weapons or to make arrests. Congress gave the FBI the authority to do so in 1934. Also in 1934, the first of 2 murder victims in Brighton, United Kingdom was discovered in an unclaimed plywood trunk at a railway station on June 17th. The victim, a woman, had been dismembered, and only her torso was in the trunk. Her legs were later found in a suitcase at King's Cross Railway Station, and her head and arms were never found. The victim, determined to be 25 and pregnant, was never identified. During the investigation, police shockingly found another body in a trunk, the body of Violet K., murdered under completely unrelated circumstances. On June 17, 1939, France had its last public execution by guillotine, when convicted murderer Eugene Weidmann was executed. Outcry after the event led France to end public executions. In an important medical first, the first successful human kidney transplant took place on June 17th in 1950 in Evergreen Park, Illinois. A team led by Dr. Richard Lawler transplanted a kidney into Ruth Tucker, a 44-year-old with polycystic kidney disease. Tucker lived for 4 more years, and her cause of death was unrelated to the transplant. June 17th also had its share of disasters. In 1929, a 7.3 magnitude earthquake occurred at 10:17 a.m., with its epicenter in a rural area north of Murchison, New Zealand. The earthquake caused significant damage across a large part of the South Island, especially to Murchison, Nelson, Greymouth, and Westport. Significant damage was caused in an estimated 10,000 square miles. The earthquake created 38 new lakes, many of which still exist. It took months to unblock roads that had been covered in landslides, and 17 people were killed. In 1973, the submersible Johnson Sea Link began what was supposed to be a routine dive near Key West, Florida, to retrieve a fish trap from the USS Fred T. Berry, which was sunk to create an artificial reef. According to the Coast Guard report, the operators displayed an incredible casualness in their preparations for the dive. The sub became entangled in a cable from the Berry and called for assistance. The Navy sent the USS Tringa. The 4 men inside were stuck for more than 24 hours, and the CO2 scrubber failed, leading to the deaths of Edwin Link and Albert Stover. And in what was likely one of the most boring days you ever sat through in history class, and what is always a potential answer to any question on Jeopardy, on June 17th, 1930, President Herbert Hoover signed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. Perhaps the best explanation of the act was written in humorist Dave Barry's enlightening 1997 History of the United States called Dave Barry Slept Here, where he said, quite frankly, "We have no idea what this is, but we think it has a wonderful ring to it." Shove that in a white Bronco with Vlad the Impaler on a day that is hosted. So much history. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.